de Beauvoir thinks we experience difficulty living today because we are obsessed with life extension. The rapidly expanding sciences give the illusion to man that he is limitless, that he can conquer any distance and with enough technology overcome the frailty of his being. De Beauvoir thinks our ever-expanding conception of the universe, history, and man delude us and rip us away from actually establishing finite and meaningful projects within a foreseeable and limited future. On de Beauvoir's view, only the events we disclose in our finitude truly exist. These grand totalities of history, the universe, and time are vacuous fictions. It should be noted that just because de Beauvoir denounces the idea of a universal history or an unfolding of the human spirit, that does not mean it is impossible to make historical prognostications. We can't take limited ensembles of events to forecast probabilistically in the near future. We just don't have certitude in the march of time, and our lives don't gain any significance by participation in that grand narrative. By studying our gaze upon the present, our democratic societies need to be mindful of not becoming authoritarian in times of crisis. If we compromise who we are in these moments, we have given into the narrative of others, who do not see the individual as the loci of all meaning. Self-determination and freedom must be integrated within an effort to push back against that which denies the value of the individual. De Beauvoir notes that festivals are frequently experienced and enjoyed as an assertion of existence once countervailing forces have been pushed back, not unlike how indigenous people celebrate in the midst of capitalist forces. The festival is unsustainable given how it in time gives way to stupidity and drunkenness. However, art at its heart begins with that same felicitous assertion of existence, except the artist intends to preserve the festival via art object. Earlier in this lecture series, I contemplated whether or not it was a problem for de Beauvoir to recommend long-term goals such as working for our children's freedom. It was potentially problematic because one could not immediately see how such a far-off ethical project could relate to our finite existence. If one enters into the struggle for civil rights or the socialist state, these ethical endeavors have to justify themselves here and now. We have to judge these projects as viable ways of asserting our existence within our limited horizon. It ought not to be of great concern what happens 500 years from now, since A, historical prediction so far out is a farce, B, there is no stable state where freedom is finally won, and C, nothing is contributed to our lives as some distant future relative experiences the fruit of our labor. We engage in these activities only because the struggle gives meaning to our lives. What if we are concerned that our ethical projects are taking on the hue of unconditional value? How can we tell ourselves from the tyrant? The test is to ask ourselves if we are really engaged in the emancipation of men. So long as we are armed with that question, we should be in good shape. De Beauvoir is going to try and give a little more content to her ethics of ambiguity in these closing pages. She really doesn't see it as being radically different from art or science. The right and wrong ethical moves are frequently contextual, just like aesthetic and empirical methodology. The artists and the science take their own methodological routes through disclosure and discovery. These routes will be marred by failure and success in the process. De Beauvoir thinks of ethics in the same way. There are some guiding principles for valid ethical activity, though. In the complex matrix of relationships that I find myself in, I am to be guided by the love of the person to free them to the possibilities of disclosure. We have heard this before when de Beauvoir aimed to convince us that our own freedom is bound up in the freedom of others. This may mean saving the life of a suicidal friend, and this may mean doing violence to someone else who seeks to oppress. It is a fine line, though. We cannot live people's lives for them. We cannot determine them from without. This is what fascists try to do. We have to respect the individual's freedom. Our ethical acts are not to be done with a Kantian formalism. That would be to conceive of men abstractly rather than concrete actualities. As cheesy as it may sound, we are to be moved by care for the individual. De Beauvoir's ethic really doesn't diverge too much from the Christian message. Perhaps it has the tone of Kant's kingdom of ends as well. She admits this much. In our love for individuals, we aim to help establish their freedom. From a governing perspective, ethical choices must weigh what maintains the freedom of all men. But what this looks like cannot be presented via a formula, calculation, or probability. It will require real anguish and will be highly dependent upon context. In some instances, this will require choosing a lesser evil where freedom is intruded upon. Thank you.